All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar Aleph, Mrs. Selma Wolf, with immense gratitude for the refuah from Hashem and the merit of a refuah shlema for all of those in need and the schus of our brave soldiers and in the schus of the return of our hostages. The Schwartzbaum family in memory of Rabbi Aaron Schwartzbaum, Aaron Yosef ben Meir, Zichron Livracha, the Ziv, Levine, and Berman families in memory of Bill Ziv, Zev Shmuel ben Yisrael, Zichron Livracha, and we dedicate our day of learning, the entire Kehillah, as a zechus for the successful surgery and refuah shlema for Mrs. Selma Wolf, who is having surgery today, Sarah Bas Ita Devora, and of course we dedicate all of Maseches Baba Kamma Le'ilu Nishmas Master Sergeant Yomi Charush Hashem Yikom Damo. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah, the families in Nechama, and all of those who need a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. But with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Kuf Gimel 103. We are picking up on Kuf Beis Mud Beis. We have a lot to do today. Some really interesting Gemara. So we're picking up. We actually began the case Makdish Nechasav. So I'll say, you know what, let's just actually, we're up to Rabbi Abba. So Rabbi Abba say is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20 lines off from the bottom. I'm counting from the bottom today. This is a good way to start the day. Remember again, we're talking about the particular case of a man who is makdish he consecrates his property. So the Bryce explained that halacha l'maisa, it doesn't include anything belonging to his wife or anything belonging to his children. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Abba, lo kol makdish nechasav ein dait v'aksus ishto banav. So says, remember again, the reason we're in this sugya right now is because beforehand in yesterday's daf, the Gemara was talking about the situation where I gave money to Ruvain and to buy wheat. And Ruvain bought barley. Remember again, we're talking about a case of a business transaction over here, not for consumption purposes, for business transaction. So the Brisa said that if Ruvain, well actually I should say, there was a machlokis between the Brisas. But one Brisa said that ultimately any depreciation is solely borne by Ruvain. Appreciation ultimately again is split down the middle. Other brisa, that was actually the second brisa. First brisa said halacha l'maisa, essentially once Ruvain deviated, he's effectively treated like a Ganov, acquires the item and is obligated to refund me the money. So we're focusing now on that second brisa, which is depreciation solely borne by Ruvain, appreciation split down the middle. So we're trying to figure out this concept of why is it exactly that appreciation is split down the middle. After all, the seller assumes that he's going ahead and selling it to Ruvain, right? That was a transaction between him and Ruvain. So Lamaisa again, why is appreciation split down the middle? So we're trying to focus on this concept of essentially where you have one person buying on behalf of someone else. Effectively, what's the relationship between the seller and the owner of the money? Right, that's really what we're trying to figure out over here. So the Gemara is bringing up this case of a makdish nechas. So Rabbi Abba says no. When you consecrate your property, the reason why your wife's and children's property is not included in that consecration is because it's not your das. That's not your das. In other words, when you're makdish your stuff, what are you including? Your stuff, right? What are you not including? Your wife's and your children's stuff. Even though, now here's what's interesting, even though perhaps you may have title to some of those items, nevertheless, bottom line, don't mess with your wife's stuff, right? In other words, right, if you're makdish your property, got to be makdish your property, don't involve anyone else's property in this. The Gemara goes weiter. Maskif Rabbi Zera, v'chi daitel sha'adam al tefilov. So this is actually fascinating. One second, using this logic, when a person is makdish his property, does he have in mind to be makdish his tefillin? So the Gemara says, Utinan, listen to this is fascinating. Hamakdish nechasav, if a person is makdish his property, ma'alin lo tefillin. Then I will say, this is so interesting, we include his tefillin in that. We include his tefillin. So let's take a look at Rashi. It's actually really ma'alin lo tefillin, v'lo v'hamaos v'yitim b'shvila lehekdish. So we'll say, now obviously what we say is, we don't assume that you're giving your tefillin over to Hekdesh, but we do assume that you're giving the value of the tefillin over to Hekdesh, and as such, if you want to get your tefillin back, you have to redeem them from the Beis HaMikdash. So we'll say, this is interesting. I don't know. I wouldn't have thought that when you're makdish your stuff, you're including your tefillin, but yet we see tefillin is included. So if tefillin is included, why isn't my wife's stuff or my kids' stuff included as well? No. In daito shal adam al tefillin. So Amrle Abaye, in daito shal adam al tefillin. So we'll say, no, Abaye says, that actually makes sense. When a person has makdish his property, his das is on his tefillin. Why? Listen to this. Savar mitzvah ka'avdina. So I'll say, because again, when I'm makdish my property, what am I doing? I'm doing a mitzvah. So bepashtas, what's included in that mitzvah? I don't know, other mitzvahs that I have also. So right, being makdish is a mitzvah, going ahead and putting on tefillin is a mitzvah. So therefore, in the process of being makdish, I'm including my tefillin as well. Conversely, we'll say, why isn't, when I'm makdish my property, why isn't my wife's stuff and my kids' stuff included in that hegdish? Why not? Mishum eva. We'll say, what does eva mean? Animosity. Nothing is worse for your shalom bayis than to come home and tell your wife, good news. Good news, we are so much closer to the Ribono Shel Olam today. Right? Bad news is I gave away all your stuff. Right? So Lamaisa, that type of animosity a man is not interested in creating. With his own tefillin, he's not, again, it's a mitzvah, it's kedusha, someone else's stuff, animosity. Maskiv Rabbi Oshia, Valo Chayve Erchin Shanukan. Rabbi Oshia said, but we're talking about over here, Erchin, right? We'll say ultimately again. So what? I'm sorry, Roshi is coming along and saying this is actually not a case of hegdish. This is actually a case ultimately again of erchin. We'll say, remember again, what's erchin? Erchin is a case where a person pledges his value to the Beis Hamikdash. Utinan, and we learned chayve erchin memashkin and oso. Ultimately, we'll say if you pledge an erech vow to the Beis Hamikdash, ultimately, halacha l'maisa, the Beis Hamikdash could seize collateral. For the value of that vow. Rashi says over here, Bal Karcho Al Malad Mishum Daitahu. Now listen, here's what's interesting. So if I make an erech vow, I say Erki Alai, I pledge my value to the Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara now says that the Beis Hamikdash itself has the right to seize collateral. Now I will say, now is it my das? Do I want the Beis Hamikdash to seize collateral? Of course not. But what you see from here ultimately again is that in these types of vows, things can be done against my will. Well, if things can be done against my will, perhaps to be able should include also my wife's property, my kid's property. Ela Amar Abaye. Ela Amar Rabbi Abba. We'll say first wide line. Kuf Beis Beis 102b. Ela Amar Rabbi Abba. Kala Makdish Nechasav Nasek Mishehikna Lo Ksus Ishta Ubana Meikara. So therefore Rabbi Abba says here. Look, here's how it works. If you're makdish your property, which of course you have the right to do, it's as if before you make that hektish declaration, you effectively are makna your wife's property to your wife and your kids' property to your kids. In other words, that's the mechanics. It's the way Chazal built in the mechanics of a hektish vow. So therefore, I will say we're trying What's kind of throwing us a little bit for a loop is, if I'm makdish my property, I'm makdish my property. What do I own? Well, technically, I may own my stuff. I may own some of my wife's stuff. I may own some of my kids' stuff. So why doesn't my hektish vow for my stuff devolve upon all of that? So essentially, what the Gemara answers is, the way Chazal created the logistics of that vow is that halacha l'maisa, you effectively give away title to that property to your wife and to your kids before you make that vow, or at the time that you make that vow, and therefore the hektish only devolves on the stuff, quote unquote, that's really yours. Second wide line, Tarabanan. Halokeach, supposed to say, is really interesting case. Halokeach sada b'shem chavero. Supposed to say, listen to this. I buy a field in the name of my friend. So watch what's happening over here. I don't know if this is legal, in today's society, but here's what's interesting. I go over to Reuven. I say, Reuven, I want to buy a field, but I don't want to buy it in my name. I want to buy it in Shimon's name. Now we'll see why someone would do this in just a moment, right? So I want to buy it in Shimon's name. In Kofin also limkar. Ultimately, again, you can't force him to sell. So, but if I said to Reuven, I'm buying it on the condition that you write on the condition, so Kofin also limkar, we force him to sell. So the Gemara says, Maika Amar, what are you talking about? Right? What is this case? This is fascinating. Amar of Sheshes, watch this. Halchi Kamar. Halokeach sada mechavero b'shem reish galusa. Watch this. I go over to Ruvain. I say, Ruvain, I'm buying this field from you, but I want it to be that the transaction, right, is known as, I want to do it in the name of the Reish Galusa. So I'm buying it in the name of the Reish. Remember again, the Reish Galusa is the head of Babylonian Jewry. So I want to buy the field in the name of the Reish Galusa. The Rabbi say, now why would someone do that? Take a look at Rashi. This is fascinating. So I say to Reuven, listen, I'm buying this for the Reish Galusa. V'niskavein lahatil ema shelo yatsu aleh asikin. V'kasev amocher shtar. We'll say, this is great. First of all, when you buy property in the name of the Reish Galusa, you know what ends up happening? Number one, other bidders walk away, right? Other bidders walk away because no one wants to mess with the Reish Galusa. And in general, even if I have other outstanding debts, right, no one is coming to seize that property that belongs to the Reish Galusa. Right, so essentially what I'm doing is, I'm using, I guess for lack of a better term, like a ghost buyer, right? But it's a good ghost buyer. In other words, I want to buy this from Ruvain, but I want the transaction to be in the name of the Reish Galusa, so that I don't run into any problems with this property. Okay, so I'll say, so then what's the halacha? So in Kofin also Reish Galusa limkar. So I will say, so you can't go ahead now. So I'll say, so let's play this out. Now, obviously, this is only a good idea if you have a relationship with the Reish Galusa, right? To start buying a property in the name of the Reish Galusa when you have no shaycha, so then probably not a good idea. But let's say I'm close to the Reish Galusa. So I go over to Ruvain. Ruvain, here's what we're going to do. We're going to write up this transaction in the name of the Reish Galusa, right? So Ruvain is selling property to the Reish Galusa. So we'll say, now what's my plan? What's my plan? My plan now is I'm going to go over to Reish Galusa. Reish Galusa, do me a favor. Now write a shtar to me. Now write a shtar to me. So the halacha now is, the Gemara says, in kofin osa Reish Galusa limkar. Ultimately, I can't force the Reish Galusa to go ahead and sell me this property. Look at Rashi. In kofin Reish Galusa, lachsar v'lichtov shtar mechira shehu machra lelokeach. So I will say, I can't force the Reish Galusa to write another document saying that the property is mine, that he sold it to me. So say, so by the way, where you say to yourself, why not? What's wrong with the Reish Galusa? So we're going to see, it doesn't look good for a person to be selling off properties, right? At least from the Gemara's perspective, selling off property was a sign of financial distress, right? So therefore, so watch what happens. I go over to Ruvain, I say, Ruvain, sell me the property, but sell to me in the name of the Reish Galusa. Fine, write to me in the name of the Reish Galusa. Reish Galusa, now write me a new document, ultimately again that you're selling this over to me. I can't force the Reish Galusa to do that. And I will say, now even though what? Whose money is in this transaction? Whose money is in here? It's my money. But I can't force the Reish Galusa to write me a new document. Vim Amr Amenas. However, again, I will say, if halacha l'maisa, I went ahead and I structured this transaction with Ruvain to say, Ruvain, I'm buying this property from you, giving you this money on the condition that the Reish Galusa will go ahead and write me a new document. Then kofanes Reish Galusa limkar. Then we could go ahead and force the Reish Galusa to go ahead and write me the new document. Okay, so we'll say a lot to unpack over here. Amar halokeach sadeh mivshem Reish Galusa in kofin also Reish Galusa limkar. So we'll say, so let's go back. Let's analyze this. I go over to Ruvain. I say, Ruvain, I'm going to buy a field, but I want to buy it in the name of the Reish Galusa. Fine, Ruvain does it. I don't have the right to force now. I have no leverage to force the Reish Galusa to go ahead and write a new document, quote unquote, selling me the property. Michlal de mekanya kanyale. So we'll say, now here's what's interesting. Now the inference from this is the fact that I can't compel the Reish Galusa indicates that what? Indicates that to a certain degree the Reish Galusa is the owner of the property. Right? The fact that I can't compel him indicates that the Reish Galusa owns the property. I say, pligi de b'nei ma'arava. So ultimately, again, say that this argues on the Jews of Eretz Yisrael, the Rabbanim of Eretz Yisrael. The Amri v'chi miho dio lebal chitin sheyikne chitin lebal abayis. So Rabbi say. So remember again beforehand, we saw on the top of the daf. This is how we got into this whole discussion, right? Remember again, Rabbi saying the Bryce that said I hired Ruvain to go ahead and buy wheat. He bought barley. So Rabbi say. So now ultimately again, there's appreciation. So the Bryce said, second Bryce said split the appreciation. So he said, but why should we split the appreciation? Who told the owner of the wheat about the owner of the money? In other words, I'm a silent partner in this transaction. The owner of the wheat was only transacting with Ruvain. So what ownership do I have in this that the Balachitin ultimately was makna over to me some portion that I should be able to share in their appreciation? So the Gemara says, Imishum ha lo kasha. No, that's not a question. I'll tell you why. Kigon de ode lebal sadeh va'odina lesahade. I will say the case in question over here is, I am telling Ruvain, the owner of the field, exactly what I'm doing. I'm telling him, I'm buying it in the name of the Reish Galusa, and then my goal is, and I'm telling it to the witnesses, and my goal is ultimately, again, that the Reish Galusa should sell it back to me. Ela Ema Seifa, I will look at the second case of the Braisa. Almanas, if I said I'm buying this on the condition that the Reish Galusa will sell it back to me, Kolfin Osa Reish Galusa Limkar. We force the Reish Galusa ultimately again to make a new document of sale. So am I, but how could I force him? So Reish Galusa, lo yakraichu ba'ina, velo zilu saichu ba'ina. Essentially, the Reish Galusa could say, leave me alone. Leave me alone. I don't understand what right did you have to involve me transactionally when I'm not a party to this transaction? So literally translated, it means I don't want your covet and I don't want your degradation. In other words, I'm not a party to this transaction. And the truth is, if anything, you used my name in a real estate transaction without permission. I'm pretty sure you're not allowed to do that in general. Right, so how can asking over here is, how can you compel the Reish Galusa to do anything when he's not a party to this transaction? Ela Amar Abaye says you're right. Haki Kamma. This is what it means to say. Here we go. Halokeach Sada V'Shem Chaver Reish Galusa. It's supposed to say if you go ahead. By the way, I just want to point out, the case doesn't only have to exist in the case of the Reish Galusa. Just the Reish Galusa is a good example. Why? Because why would someone do something like this? Someone would do something like this because they want to kind of create like a bulletproof transaction. They don't want anyone else coming in. Either they want to scare off potential buyers, which is a potential problem, a halachic problem of scaring off potential buyers, or they just want it to be that no one's going to seize this field. So you kind of put in there another buyer. So in any event, so I go over to Ruvain. Here's the case. I go over to Ruvain. I buy the field in the name of the Reish Galusa. I'll say top of Kuf Gimel 103a. Ein kolfen es hamocher limgar zimna achrisi. I can't force the seller to sell it to me another time. Now, what does that mean? Take a look. Top Rashi 103a. So, ein kolfen es hamocher lachzor v'lichtov shtar mechira achar lelokeach. So, listen to this. So, this is fascinating. So, I go over to Ruvain and say, Ruvain, go ahead, sell me some of the field, but I'm buying in the name of the Reish Galusa. Fine. Ruvain writes up the contract. After that's done, so now both says, now essentially, I'm the owner of the field. Now I go over to Ruvain and say, Ruvain, write me now another shtar. Another shtar. And in this shtar, I wanted to say, Ruvain sold the field to Silber. I want you to explicitly, okay, so now that we kind of got the transaction done, right, and I'm the owner of the field, now I need a new shtar that says I'm the owner. I just want it to be explicit. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, in kolfin, I have no right to force the seller to go ahead and write that document. Again, look at Rashi. Lachzor se'in kolfin es hamocher, lachzor v'lichtov shtar mechira acher lelokeach. I have no right, I have no leverage to force Ruvain to write another document of sale. Shahayir lo lahaslos ulhodia kasav shtari b'shem Reish Galusa shem yatsu asikin era lahem shu shareish Galusa v'kasav lishtar acher b'shmi shelo yavo hayom olamachar yarshe Reish Galusa l'tova meni. Both say, in other words, if I wanted a second shtar, so both say, so just probably Rashi spells this out. Essentially, I want the real estate transaction to be in the name of the Reish Galusa, because I'm not interested in having anyone try to seize this property. On the other hand, I do need another shtar, right? I need another shtar. What do I need the second shtar to say? I need the second shtar to say that I am the owner. Why? Because if the Reish Galusa dies, what's going to end up happening? His yarshim, his inheritors, are going to come to try to seize this property. So I will say, so now watch this. So let me tell you this case. I'll say, here we go. So I buy the property from Ruvain. I buy the name of the Reish Galusa for all of the reasons we mentioned before. So now afterwards, I say, Ruvain, I need a second shtar that says I am the true owner of the property. So I can't compel Ruvain to go ahead and write another shtar. In other words, Ruvain's not obligated to do that. I can't force him. If, however, I stipulated at the time of the sale, I'm buying this field on the name of the Reish Galusa on the condition that you write me a second shtar in my name afterwards, then what? Then I have the ability to force him to do so. Beautiful. So we'll say, so that case makes a lot more sense. Amar Mar, halokech saleh b'shem chavero. It's a really interesting case. So we'll say I buy a field in the name of my friend. So I buy a field in the name of Shimon. I buy a field from Ruvain in the name of Shimon. Ein kofen es hamochar limkar zimna achrina. So we'll say, so ultimately, again, you can't force Ruvain, the seller, to go ahead and write another shtar. So we'll say this essentially is the same case. It's the same case. So the Gemara says, Pshita. So we'll say it's obvious. So Mao Temoju have thought, Matzi Amarle, Meida Yadat da Anula Nafshay Shaklina, Upanchia Ba'almohu de Kabaina, Vizuzi Bichte Lo Shadina. So we'll say, so in other words, you would have thought as follows. So we'll say, here's the good news. In these transactions, the buyer and the seller are explicitly aware of what's happening over here, right? So I'm going over to Ruvain. I'm buying the field in the name of the Reish Galuso or Shimon or anyone else. Ruvain knows exactly what's happening over here, right? So therefore, again, I will say, you might have thought that in a transaction like this, it is clear that I am going to need a second document, right? I'm going to need another document that is written in my name. Why? You're both say, why? Because I can say to Ruvain, of course, in a document that's in my name. Why? I'm not going to go ahead and spend my money on nothing. I'm not going to throw away my money. And if I don't have a document that somehow lists me as the owner, then what? I'm essentially throwing away my money. I'm throwing away my money. So therefore, you might have thought that this is almost like implicit in this type of transaction. So the Gemara says, Ella adaita de kasav l'shtar achrina. So therefore, by definition, I'm only doing this because I know that Ruvain is willing to write me another document. Kamash malan de amar lei inyana avdi lecha bahadi hahu de zabanta la b'shmei v'yichtov lecha shtar achrina. So it's like kamash malan that Ruvain the seller can say, listen, buddy, I'm happy to go along with your transaction, but if you want any additional documents, that's between you and the fictional buyer, right? It has nothing to do with me anymore. Both say, now remember again, so essentially, what Ruvain can see, it's so fascinating. So the Havamina is, when I go to buy field from Ruvain, so let's just keep in the name of the Reish Galusa, and as I'm doing the name of the Reish Galusa, right? Ruvain understands what's happening over here. So maybe it should be implicit in the transaction that he's going to write me another document in my name. Kamash Malan Ruvain can say, listen, if you stipulated that at the outset, of course I'd be forced to comply. But you didn't stipulate it. You want another document. Who is that between? That's between you and the Reish Galusa, or me and the Reish Galusa. I'm not writing you additional documents. Now both say, now ultimately again, what's the reluctance to write additional documents? Remember, as we mentioned before, if Ruvain has a document that says he sold the field to the Reish Galusa, and then he has another document that says he sold the field to Shmuel Silber, it doesn't look good. Because now there are multiple real estate sale documents associated with Ruvain, and this paints a picture of financial distress. So Ruvain's not being difficult. Ruvain's just trying to safeguard his own financial reputation. V'im amar amanas. However, I can say at the time of the transaction, I said to Ruvain, I'm buying this field in the name of the Reish Galusa on the condition that halacha l'maisa you write me a second document. Then kolfanas hamochar limkar. Then ultimately, then obviously we would force Ruvain to write me a second document. The Gemara says pshita. I don't understand. That's kind of obvious. Lo tzricha da amar lahu l'sahadi kamei didei chazu d'shtara achrina kaba. So we'll say, no, what's the case? The case could be ultimately, again, where halacha l'maisa, I didn't say it to Ruvain per se, but perhaps I said it to the witnesses who are witnessing the transaction. All right, ma'u d'tema, what would you have thought? Matzi amrale amina shtara mehech deka shaklis b'shmei ka'amrit. You might have thought that he was saying, that I was saying that I'm going to get a second document from the person in whose name the transaction is, i.e. Ruvain. Kamash malan da amrale lahachi tarchi va'amrulu le'idim kamach. Therefore, was like Kamashal, and I can say, listen, the fact that I went out of my way to say this over in front of the witnesses indicates that what? My intention was to get a second document from you, from the seller. Okay, so I will say, so just a fascinating case. So bottom line, what comes out over here is first of all, apparently, halacha seems to accept this case of being able to go ahead and buy property in the name of another party, where clearly, again, my intention is I'm buying it myself, but I'm trying to, let's say, shield it from creditors or something like that. And again, halacha l'maisa, after that, and obviously after that sale, and now I am technically the owner, the problem is I have no documentation. So I will say, so I don't really have any recourse ultimately, again, from the buyer listed in the document, because the buyer listed in the document could say, leave me alone. So what recourse do I have? Potentially with the seller. But the only recourse I have is at the time of the transaction, if I made it explicitly clear that this entire transaction is predicated on you, seller, writing me a new document, then the seller is compelled to do so. But if I did not stipulate that at the outset, then halacha l'maisa, I have no right to demand a second document. Incredible. Rav Kahana, Yoev Zuzi Akisna. So it was an interesting case over here. Rav Kahana gave money for flax. Now what happened over here is he gave money to a flax merchant. He gave the money. He purchased the flax, but he did not take physical possession of the flax. Okay, what happened? L'sof iyakar kisna. So then the price of flax went up. Zabne marvase de kisna. So the guy who had the flax sold it. Now, I want to point out what's happening over here. He sold Rav Kahana's flax. In other words, he felt that he was doing Rav Kahana a tova. Like, in other words, I'm holding on to your flax, so instead of just holding on to the flax, let me sell it, cash out, and ultimately, again, there's a benefit. Look at Rashi. He says, Zabne marbasa de kisna almanas litin demeyan shehein lokhin l'Rav Kahana. So his intention was to give Rav Kahana the proceeds of the sale. So what's this? I just want to point out what happened over here. So Rav Kahana gave merchant $500. Buying flax, okay? So he bought the flax, ultimately again, but never took possession of it. Now what happens? Flax appreciates. That same $500 of flax is now worth $700. Merchant says, Chaparayin over here, sells off the flax, has $700 to give to Rav Kahana. Okay? So we'll say, so now, already again, what's the issue with this? It's beginning to feel a little bit like a ribis issue, like interest. Because we'll say, remember again, just understand what does happen at the end of the day. Rav Kahana gave the guy $500. How much is the guy giving back? $700. So we'll say, so now watch this. So Asla Kamei Rav. So they brought this case before Rav. Amrlei, my Yavid. So ultimately, again, they said so Rav Kahana said to Rav, what should I do? Ezel ishkel zuzai. Am I able to go ahead and accept the money? Amrlei, ika zabni amri haikisna dekahanahu zil shakil v'ilo lo sishkal. So Rabbi say this is fasting. So Rav said like this. Listen to this. Rav said like this. It depends. When the merchant went and sold the flax, what did he tell the buyer? Did he tell the buyer that this is Rav Kahana's flax? If he said it's Rav Kahana's flax, then Rav said, you can keep the money. Keep the money, because then essentially someone was selling your flax on your behalf. Any proceeds that were realized were directly related or owned by you. If, however, the merchant never made any mention, bless you, of you, if he never made any mention of you, to Rabbi say, Rav said, this it looks a little bit more like a ribis case. It's going to look like interest, right? V'ilo lo sishkal. And if not, ultimately, again, don't take it. Rashi says, why? Mishum ribis. Because Rabbi say it really looks like interest. So in other words, because then essentially what's happening over here is Rav Kahana gave the merchant $500. He's transacting business and he's giving you back $700. So I'll say that already looks like ribis. So I'll say, so fascinating here, right? So the Gemara says, so I'll say, so one more time. If the merchant, when he was doing business with the flax, so a merchant takes the flax and says, listen, this is Rav Kahana's flax, and I want to sell it. And that's how the profit was realized, not because it was Rav Kahana's flax, but because, again, it was identified as Rav Kahana's flax. You could keep, Rav says Rav Kahana, you could keep the money, but if not, you can't keep the money ribis. So the Gemara says, okay, Kiman, whose opinion does this reflect? Kibnei ma'araba. This reflects ultimately, again, the Jews of Eretz Yisrael, or sorry, really Rashi says it's a question, right? Kiman kimema Rava, there's this reflective view of the Jews of Eretz Yisrael. Take a look at Rashi just a moment. Kiman kimema Rava bitmiya kilomar darmina mi hodin lelochin sheyiknu ma'osein Rav Kana lefichach lo zacha bahen. So we'll say, so now again, does this go in accordance with what we attributed for the name B'nai Ma'arava? The Amri mi hodia lebal chitin sheyikne chitin lebal ma'os. So remember again, we said before in the Brisa that said that they split the appreciation, right? Ultimately, again, the Jews of Eretz Yisrael said, the Rabban of Eretz Yisrael said, who told the owner of the wheat that ultimately, again, this wheat was owned by the owner of the money, someone other than the person they were transacting with? Atu mi yayev Rav Kahana arba v'shakol tamni kisna mela. So I'm sorry. Atu mi yayev Rav Kahana arba v'shakol tamni. Did Rav Kahana? We'll say this is not a case of ribbis. Did Rav Kahana give the merchant 400 and he took back 800? Kisna memela hu diyaker. Migzal gazla. So I'll say, so ultimately again, the flax appreciated. Now I will say, now what happened over here, now this is fascinating, the flax appreciated. Now I will say, now was the merchant operating under the instructions of Rav Kahana? He was not. So I will say, so effectively remember, whenever you operate outside of the purview of your shlichus, in halacha, what are you essentially viewed as? A ganav. A ganav. You're viewed as a thief. Now, if you're viewed as a thief, utnan, kala gazlonin, mishalmin kishas hagzela. Oh, Bo say, listen to this. This is fascinating how everything kind of comes together. Now, Bo say, what's the halacha by gezel? What's the halacha by theft? Right? If you steal something from someone, you're obligated to pay back the item. How do we evaluate the item? How do we evaluate it? At the time it was stolen. So Bo say, so halacha l'maisa, I don't understand why are we dealing with over here about proceeds from a sale. At the end of the day, Rav Kahana did not empower this shaliach to sell off his flax. He didn't empower him to do it. If he didn't empower him to do it, then essentially the shaliach is a thief. If the shaliach is, if the merchant is a thief, if he's a thief, fine. In other words, fine. In other words, again, I want to be clear. It wasn't the intention of the merchant to steal, but the moment you go out of the parameters of your defined agency, halacha essentially treats it like theft. If you're a thief, then the value of the item is locked in at the time of quote unquote the theft. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, Amri Hasam Amana Havi Velo Mashchi Rav Kahana Lekisna. So we'll say this was a little bit of a different case. This was what we call an Amana. Now we'll say, look at Rashi, Amana Havi, Shinasan Lahem Maos Ba'amana, Velo Haya Lahem Pishtan Kishekiblu Damim, Vehisna Imo Kishar Hazal, Litin Lo Kolashana Bishar Zeh. So we'll say, we're going to talk about this more in Bava Metzia. So this is actually an interesting case. It almost seems like you're buying a future over here. So what is happening over here is I go over to Ruvain the merchant, and I say, listen, here's $500 for flax. Now I both say, Ruvain doesn't have flax. He doesn't have flax. But what I'm doing is, I'm giving him money for flax, and I'm locking in flax at a particular rate. I'm locking it at a particular value, right? So we'll say, so now watch this. The Gemara says, this not Bava Metzia, Yotza Shar Poskin Afapi She'in Lazeh Yesh Lazeh. So we'll say, if we go ahead and we lock, that's called buying something with amana. Amana like simulation of amuna, right? I'm buying it on trust. I'm giving it money now. We're locking in the value of the item now. So we'll say, so the case over here is, I gave Ruvain money for flax. He doesn't have flax right now. So the Gemara says, Amri Hasam Amana Havi, V'la Mashchi Rav Kahana Lekisna. So I'll say, so Rav Kahana, as I mentioned this at the outside of the case, Rav Kahana obviously never took possession, ultimately again, of the flax itself. Now watch this. For Rav Latame, now both say, remember, what did Rav say in this? So both say, so now, watch this. I go ahead. I gave $500 to Ruvain to secure flax, right? At this cheaper rate. Now what happens? So Ruvain goes out and purchases the flax. Then he sells it. Flax appreciates. He sells it, right? He realizes a profit of $200. Now it's worth $700. So he sells it off. Now there's $700 waiting for me. So remember again, what did Rav say? So now remember, Rav Kahana came to Rav and said, "Can I go ahead and can I get the money?" What did Rav say? It depends. did the shaliach sell your flax? If when he sold it, he said, this is Rav Kahana's flax, you can keep the money. If he didn't go ahead and identify it as your flax, he can't keep the money. Osin amona beperos, vein osin amona bedamim. Shabbos, now watch this. You could do an amona transaction with produce, in other words, with a commodity, but you can't do an amona transaction with money. Look at Rashi, it is incredible. The Tamei Damarav Bezul Neshech Osin Amana Lite Mos Ala Shar Shalzol Shal Achsha Beperos. The Kabal Peros B'Shar Yoker. Shabbos say, so you could have really changed the B'Shar Zol. So ultimately, again, so you could do this with produce, right? I could go ahead and give a merchant money and say, let's agree, you're going to provide me produce at a future date for this price. For this price. Fine. You can't do a similar transaction with money. Look at Rashi. They know sinamana bedamim kisheban l'shar hayoker lekabel perosav asher litin lo mocher damim shel achshav demechse kiribis diav leitarti islam v'shakel arba. So I will say ultimately again, what I can't do is ultimately again go ahead and stipulate that if I give him money now at a certain price, he's going to return that to me in the form of produce at a higher price later on. That has ultimately, again, the appearance of, that has the appearance ultimately of ribis. More than just an appearance, it could actually be ribis. So we'll say, so now watch this. Now let's play this out. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, what happened over here? Rav Kahana gave the merchant money. Why did he give the merchant money? I'm buying flax at a rate of $500. I'm locking a price of $500. He gives him the money, never takes possession of the flax. So the merchant buys flax, but it turns out the flax goes up to $700. Merchant sells it off. So now watch this. If halacha l'maisa, the merchant went ahead and identified this flax of Rav Kahana's flax, then Rav Kahana could keep the proceeds of the sale. Why? Because halacha l'maisa, this has the appearance of buying peros ala amona. Right? It's a future. He exercised the future right. Absolutely no problem. If, however, the produce was not identified as Rav Kahana's produce, then the problem just is, this looks like you're transacting with money as opposed to produce. And that's a problem, because now if essentially Rav Kahana gave $500 and he's getting back $700, that's going to be the problem. Okay, we'll say that's the case. Again, interesting, so we're going to deal with all just coming attractions. This is all Ezehun Neshech, right? These are all interest cases that Emir Hashem we are going to go ahead and do. So we're going to see one of the interesting distinctions when it comes to interest cases is the way to often avoid the appearance of interest is to go ahead and make the transactions about produce as opposed to money, because appreciation in produce could ultimately be realized without triggering ribis issues. Increased amounts of money are obviously going to go ahead and trigger all kinds of ribis issues, but Emir Hashem to be continued in Bava Mitzvah. Beautiful. Good. I will say good. So the takeaway from here ultimately is how Rav Paskin for Rav Kahana. Good. Good. So Mar says, "Fals Mishnah Hagos las chavero shavar pruta v'nishba." So we'll say, okay. So now we're transitioning a little bit over here to a different kind of sugya. So we'll say just 5 seconds of background. Halacha l'maisa, I steal from Ruvain, and I both say I deny that I ever stole anything, and I swear that I never stole anything. Then it turns out that I stole. Right? I admit. So I'll say, so what's the halacha? I admitted that I stole. So what's the halacha? 3 things I'm obligated. Number 1, Keren. Number 2, Chomesh, an additional penalty, 5th. And number 3, ultimately again a carbon asham. Right? The sin offering. Those are the 3 things that I'm obligated in. So as in, I watch this. So I steal a pruta from Ruvain. So not worth it, right? Either go big or go home, right? But lamaisa, obviously in these kind of cases, what it means is a minimum of a pruta. If you steal less than a pruta, halach lamaisa, that doesn't trigger anything. That's a non-theft. So I steal at least a pruta from Ruvain. Finish balo, right? And I swore to Ruvain that I didn't steal. And Rashi says, I point out over here, I lied. Right, I lied, and I admit that I lied. So what's the halacha? Yolichenu acharav lamadai. So we'll say, now this is incredible. So the Gemara says over here, Mishnah says over here, that in order to ultimately do tshuva and make this situation right, I have to track down Ruvain to pay him back what I owe him. It's not, in other words, the tshuva process is not enough just to say, okay, I'm sorry, I did it. Here's the money, here's the keren, here's the chomesh, here's the carbon asham. I'll put it all in escrow. It doesn't work. You have to track down the victim. You have to track down the victim, even if you have to go to Madai. Right. I was like, by the way, how incredible is this? It's Adar Aleph, Chel Parasu Madai, right? Already again in Megillah, already again we're getting ready for Purim. Already the daf is preparing us for Purim. You have to go ahead and track him down to Madai. Lo yitin lo, so lo yitin lo libno, lo yitin lo libno, for lo l'shlucho. I will say you can't give it to Ruvain's son, you can't give it to Ruvain's shliach, aval nosin l'shliach bezdin. So essentially, what the Gemara is saying is like this. Look at Rashi. The guy says, this is incredible. When I swear falsely, this is dafka din by swearing falsely. When I swear falsely about a theft, and now I want to make good, it's not enough just to kind of say, okay, I'm putting the money in escrow, Ruvain is here for you whenever you want it. I, the thief, have an obligation to track down the victim and give him the money. Not to give it to his son, not to give it to his shaliach. The only exception is I can give it to a shliach bezdin. Right? I can't give it to an officer of the court, the shliach of the court. The mace, what happens if Ruvain died? What happened if Ruvain died? So ultimately, again, Yachzir the Yarshav. Ultimately, then I can give it back to his inheritors. Now, by the way, Rashi points out over here, Lo yitin lo libno, shal nigzal laholichol l'nigzal shem yansu, chayiv lahachzir davi hashava adamat liyadeh. So we'll say, so essentially, again, halacha l'maisa, we need you to give it directly back to the victim. L'shliach bezdin, Rashi says, takantu da'avid rabbanim l'yakaras hashavim, shal chayiv lazeh lahotzi manabot zeh. So we'll say, so now watch this. However, so on one hand, Chazal said, if you want to do tshuva, you need to give back the stolen item to the victim. However, the one thing Chazal did say is, you can also give it back to the court. Now the reason Chazal had to do that, I both say, was because of Takana Shavim. Let's say Ruvain is in the Bahamas. I don't want to, I can't spend money to go find him in the Bahamas, right? I can't do that. So we're concerned that that's going to be an obstacle to tshuva. So therefore, as much as the halacha demands that you return the stolen object to the victim or the money to the victim, Chazal did give you an easier out to facilitate tshuva, which is you could also return it to your local Beis Din. Return to your local Beis Din, and that satisfies the requirement. Incredible. Let's say I returned the keren. I returned the principal. So I stole from Ruvain. Again, same case. I stole, I swore falsely, I admitted. So now I'm paying back everything. Let's say I gave the principal to Ruvain, but I didn't give him the penalty fifth. Or Ruvain he forgave it, right? He forgave the principal, but didn't forgive the fifth, right? Or he forgave both the principal as well as the fifth. So but let's say what Ruvain did was, he says, I forgive everything except for a half a pruta of the principal. I will say, some people are like that when they give forgiveness, right? I forgive you, but I'll never forget, right? I'll forgive you, right? I forgive everything, but a half a pruta. What's the halacha? So we'll say, essentially, the halacha is like this. This obligation of the thief to track down the victim only applies for the repayment of keren. It doesn't apply for the repayment of the fifth. So let's say again, I repaid the keren, but didn't yet get to repay the fifth. Or Ruvain was mochel on the keren, but not the chomesh. Or he was mochel both. Or he was mochel on everything, but he said, you still have to pay back half a pruta of the keren. Supposed to say half a pruta is nothing. It's nothing halachically significant. In all of these cases, essentially, I don't owe Ruvain the keren. If I don't owe Ruvain the keren, even if there's still an outstanding fifth or something else, I don't have the obligation to track him down. Incredible. However, if I repaid Ruvain the chomesh, the fifth, but not the keren, or or Ruvain forgave the chomesh, but he didn't forgive the Karen, or machalo al zeh v'al zeh chutz mishavar pruta v'Karen, or Ruvain forgave everything except for a pruta of the Karen. So we'll say the common denominator in all of these cases is there is still some part of the Karen that is outstanding. Sarech leilech acharav. We'll say as long as there is a pruta of the Karen that is outstanding, then what? I have this obligation to track down Ruvain, to track down the victim and pay him back the money. So let's listen to this case. So we'll say this is a great case. Listen to this case. I steal from Ruvain. I steal from him. Stole $1,000. And what happened? I swore that I didn't steal. And then I will say I admitted that I stole and that I swore falsely. So now what am I obligated on? I have the Karen, the $1,000 plus now an additional fifth. So I say, so now what happens? I pay back Ruvain. Ruvain says, okay, but you didn't pay me back the fifth. I say, of course I did. I'm offended. Right? Of course I paid you back the fifth. Not only that, I'll swear that I paid you back the fifth. So let's say, so now I swear about the fifth, and it turns out I swore falsely. We'll say, I've got some real problems, right? So I'll say, this is mamish, the guy is swearing falsely about the chomesh. So I went ahead and I swore falsely about finishra al chomesh. We'll say, I'm a base. Harezem shalim chomesh al chomesh. Okay. I'll say, so now what happens? So now essentially what occurs over here is the chomesh becomes the Karen. Right, so the chomesh becomes the principal. Right, so in other words, I swore that I paid back the chomesh, so, right? So, and now I swore falsely. I admit that I swore falsly. So now again, the chomesh becomes the Karen, becomes the principal, and now I owe an additional fifth on that chomesh. Harizem mishalim chomesh al chomesh ad sheisma'it hakaren mishavar pruta. And I will say, and we could keep doing this all day long, right? In other words, we could keep doing this. So now I'm going to say the same thing could repeat itself over and over and over, and essentially the claim could continue forward, literally again until the chomesh becomes less than a shavar pruta. In other words, I will say you could just keep extending this out. So essentially every single time the chomesh becomes the Karen, then there's a new chomesh. Then again, if you swear about that chomesh becomes the Karen, and you can just keep doing this as long as there is a shavar pruta left in the chomesh that is being denied. And ultimately, I will say the same halach applies to a pikadon. וכן בפיקדון, שנאמר או פיקדון או שומס יד או בגזל או עושק אס עמיתו או מצא עבדה וכיחש בה ונשבע על שקר. So we'll say הרי זה משלם קרן וחומש ואשם. So we'll say the same halacha would apply to pikadon. For example, Ruvain deposits something with me. Ultimately, he comes to get it back. I say I don't have it, or I gave it back to you. I swear. Then it turns out that I swore falsely. I'm obligated three things: Karen, chomesh, and ultimately carbon asham. So both as the pasuk points out, all of these things are grouped together. V'kichesh ba'amito, b'pikadon, b'shomas yad, b'gezel, or b'gazel, or oshek es amito. Good. So we'll say good. How all these cases, if you deny what you have, ultimately again three things: Karen, chomesh, asham. Here we go. Nishpalo in, lo nishpalo no. So we'll say. So now here's what's interesting. All of these cases obviously are talking about a case where I swear. So we'll say, how do we start? How do we set up the Mishnah? Right? Ruvain, I went ahead and I stole something from Ruvain. I stole $1,000 from Ruvain. Then what happens? Right? I swear, I'm confronted with the fact or with an accusation, and what do? I swear that I did not go ahead and steal it. I swear that I didn't go ahead and steal it. Then I admit that I lied. What's the halacha? What's the halacha? I have three things. What are the three things? Let's go through one more time. Number one, Karen. Number two, chomesh. Number three, asham. Now remember, I will say, what is the Mishnah? Now the Mishnah is not introducing that to me. That's a pasuk in the Torah. So what is the Mishnah introducing to me? The Mishnah is introducing to me that I have an obligation to track down the victim to repay him. That's the new obligation. So the Gemara says it's interesting. It sounds like from the Mishnah that the only time you have an obligation to track down the victim to repay him is when? In this case where I swore falsely. Nishpa in lo nishpa lo. It's only if I swore falsely that I have an obligation to track down the victim. But if I must say, what about just like a stam case of theft? I stole from Ruvain. And then you know what? I become about tshuva. And I want to go ahead and give back the item. What does it sound like? What does it sound like about say? What does it sound like from our Mishnah? That I don't have an obligation to track down Ruvain. In other words, whatever, I see Ruvain's kid, I say, hey, Ruvain's kid, give this to your father. right? I see Ruvain's wife, Mrs. Ruvain, give this to your husband. That I don't have an obligation to track him down. It's only dafka in the case of a false oath that I have an obligation to track him down. Money. So I'll say, whose opinion does this reflect? Lo Rabbi Tarfon, lo Rabbi Akiva. It's neither Rabbi Tarfon nor Rabbi Akiva. I'll say, why not? I'll say, this is so exciting. This sound. I'll say, listen to this case. Listen to this case. Gazal echad michamisha ve'eni yodea eza mehen. I'll say, now listen to this. I stole from one of five people, but I don't know who I stole from. I don't know which guy, right? So let's say, now what happens? V'chol echad omer osi gazal. Now, of course, I will say, all five guys say, it was me. I was me, right? So I'll say, so what do I, so this fascinating is, so what do I do? Like, what do I do in this case? So the Gemara says, Maniach gizila b'nei u'mistad Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon says, you know what you do, Rabbi say? You drop the stolen item in the middle of the five guys, and you run. In other words, leave it there. In other words, I have an obligation to repay. I don't know who to repay, so here's what I'm going to do is, I'm putting my thing down in the middle, and you guys duke it out. Rabbi Akiva says, absolutely not. Lozu derech motzi asim de'avera. I will say, that is not the way to do tshuva. But Rabbi Akiva's lashon is so profound over here. This is not the derech to extract yourself from sin. Ad shishalim gezel lechol echad ve'echad. Wow. Rabbi Akiva says, no, if you want, I will say, now again, Rabbi Akiva's lashon is interesting. I will say, it's incredible. What does tshuva require? I will say, the key part to tshuva is clarity. Chait occurs because of ambiguity, right? In that moment of sin, my radar between right and wrong, right? My vision of right and wrong is totally blurred and obscured. That's how I get myself into trouble. Ambiguity, lack of clarity. What's tshuva? Tshuva is a moment of absolute clarity. I know what I did, I own it, I accept it, I know how to make it right, I know to move myself forward. Rabbi Akiva says, to do tshuva, you have to have clarity. You can't drop an item in the middle of five guys and let them duke it out. If you want absolute clarity, you want to ensure that you have clarity of tshuva, what do? You repay every single one of those five people. That's your obligation. So we'll say, so now watch this, money. So who's the opinion does our Mishnah reflect? Rabbi Tarfon. See if you want to say it's Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon would say, Afagav dishtaba amar maniach gezilim b'neihem umistalik. So we'll say, ultimately, again, I understand, Rabbi Tarfon is the opinion that says that essentially, you could kind of just put the item down and you're done. In other words, my obligation is to give back the item. So according to Rabbi Tarfon, why should I have to track down the victim, Ruvain, after I swore falsely? Just give it to Ruvain's kid, give it to Ruvain's wife, give it to the Beis Din, right? Why do I have an obligation to track him down? So in other words, the same way that I don't have an obligation to try to figure out who amongst the five, I just put the object down, let them duke it out. So too again, let me give back the object, I'll put the object in the middle, or I'll give back the object to Ruvain's relative, or I'll drop it on his doorstep, and that's it. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva would say, Afagav delo ishtaba, amar ad sheishalim gezel lechol echad ve'echad. We'll say, if it's Rabbi Akiva, then the truth is Rabbi Akiva would obligate you to track down the victim. We'll say, even if you didn't swear, right? Because according to Rabbi Akiva, will say tshuva is only accomplished when there's absolute and explicit clarity that you've rectified your crime. So even if I didn't swear falsely, Rabbi Akiva would still make me track down the victim and repay him directly. To which the Gemara says, whose opinion is it? Li'olam Rabbi Akiva he. So we'll say really our Mishnah reflects Rabbi Akiva. V'chi kam Rabbi Akiva ad sheishan gzei l'chol echad ve'echad. And according to Rabbi Akiva, when does Rabbi Akiva say that you have to go out and give back the stolen item to every single person? Heicha d'ishtabahu d'ka'amar. We'll say Rabbi Akiva's case is a case of where I swore falsely. So my timer. So we'll say what's the reason? My time, Adamakra la hu lo yitnedu biyom ashmaso. So I will say because the pasuk when a person swears falsely, ultimately again uses the lashon of la asher hu lo yitnedu biyom ashmaso. I will say you have an obligation to give back the item to the person who you adversely impacted. So halacha l'maisa, it's in that case of swearing falsely where Rabbi Akiva would say you have to give an object back to all five. Similarly, again, our Mishnah that says that halacha l'maisa, you have to find the victim after you swore falsely is Rabbi Akiva. So we'll say we'll have to stop here. He says Rabbi Tarfon, afagav de ishtaba avod rabbanan takanta. We're going to say we'll stop over here for today. way. But Rabbi Tarfon is going to be of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, even if you swore falsely, ultimately, again, the Rabbanan still made a takana to facilitate the ease of tshuva. So I will say, so bottom line, here's what we're ending off with. Our Mishnah introduces us to a new concept that says that if you swear falsely, and now you want to make restitution, which comprised of 3 parts, right? Principal, chomesh, and karban, you have to, part of your tshuva is tracking down the victim. But the Gemara Mishnah makes on this is only a case dafka where there was a false oath. So whose opinion is being reflected? We have Machlokes Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon. So the way the Gemara is ending off is the Gemara wants to say it must be Rabbi Akiva. And Miras Hashem will continue with this conversation tomorrow. Get resolution, get halacha l'maisa, shkoyach.
If you're paying 5 people, so you're paying for lying.
You're paying for lying.
Yeah.
Right.
4 of them are lying. So
Correct.
you're paying for lying.
Because at the end of the day, the